If we trace this conspiracy back to its flashpoint, it all began on a quiet Wednesday night, just past midnight. Inside the cold, imposing walls of the Apostolic Palace, the lights burned late into the night. Pope Leo XIV sat entirely alone at his massive wooden desk, staring at a black folder sealed with heavy red wax. Within those pages lay the names of 7 cardinals, each linked to financial corruption and moral scandals grave enough to bring down the entire Vatican overnight. A trembling senior official had just begged him to authorize immediate public arrests. Yet, the pontiff merely looked at the dossier, closed it, and uttered a single word: no. In that cold refusal, he quietly exposed a truth the Church had spent decades trying to bury. The reason for his hesitation was simple, yet terrifying. The cardinals were never the ones actually running the show. Just 3 days earlier, Rome had been completely blindsided by an anonymous 47-page internal report. It arrived on the desks of every major Vatican department head at the exact same hour. The details were utterly devastating, listing secret offshore bank accounts in Liechtenstein, luxury properties in Geneva, and hush money paid to high-priced lawyers. By morning, the dossier had leaked to foreign embassies and journalists alike, sparking sheer panic across the Curia. Yet Pope Leo XIV remained quiet. He asked his secretary only one question: who leaked it? When met with silence, the Pope nodded. Then we already know. With the document in hand, the Pope retreated to his private chapel, reading every line in total isolation for 2 hours. He then summoned the trembling prefect responsible for the bishops. Leo XIV demanded the absolute truth, asking how many of the listed names were accurate. When the terrified prefect admitted that every single one was correct, a heavy silence fell over the room. The Pope then uttered a chilling realization. This report is a weapon, and someone is trying to force my hand. Before we go any deeper into this investigation, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts below. Your support allows us to keep uncovering these hidden truths. By Thursday, this explosive file finally had a name. The media quickly dubbed the leak Dossier April, splashing the names across front pages throughout Italy. It detailed years of systemic corruption involving 7 cardinals, tracing a dark path right to the peak of the Roman Curia. Outside, public anger boiled over as protesters flooded St. Peter's Square, demanding swift justice. Inside, a quiet civil war had erupted. The powerful faction known as the Old Guard demanded an emergency audience, anticipating papal fury. Instead, Leo XIV sat in absolute silence for nearly an hour, letting them speak. When he finally stood, the room grew cold. He told them he had scrutinized every single name, every bank account, and every listed piece of property. The Pope looked at his cardinals and calmly announced that he would not act on the dossier. When an outraged cardinal protested, claiming they could not simply sit on their hands, Leo XIV did not raise his voice. He made it clear that he had no intention of doing nothing, only that he would not play into this specific hand. He explained that the document was never an accident. It was at that moment the prelates realized the horrifying truth. The dossier was not a leak at all. It was bait. Later that night, the Pope secretly received a retired magistrate from Milan inside his private apartments. This layman was a trusted ally who had spent decades dismantling complex financial networks and watching corrupt banks collapse. This prosecutor had watched powerful ministers fall and massive networks dissolve from the impact of a single, well-placed piece of evidence. Though the public believed he retired in 2017, he had actually been collaborating with Leo XIV on a highly confidential project that existed completely off the books. His mission tonight was straightforward: study the dossier and locate the single lie. He knew that even the most accurate leaks contain one false detail meant to trap a specific target. The magistrate worked tirelessly under the dim lamplight. By dawn, he found the flaw. 3 of the accused cardinals were guilty, 4 accounts were inflated, and the most devastating accusation was entirely fabricated. The forged accusation targeted a specific cardinal, who had recently defected from the old guard to back the Pope's sweeping reforms. It was a brilliant, wicked trick. If the pontiff ordered the arrest of all 7 men, he would unwittingly destroy his own key ally inside the Curia. The document was never meant to clean up corruption. It was designed to trick the Pope into neutralizing his own support system. The magistrate warned him directly that this was a trap, and Leo XIV calmly admitted he already knew. Yet the mastermind behind this plot remained a mystery. By Friday, international pressure reached a boiling point. 3 European governments demanded action, with France warning they would unleash financial regulators within 72 hours. At the same time, German bishops demanded complete transparency, and Spain delivered a quiet ultimatum through diplomatic channels. Even Italy launched a preliminary investigation. To make matters worse, one of the accused cardinals gave a rogue interview painting the Pope as dangerously isolated, while another abruptly resigned and fled to Switzerland. Inside the Vatican, the tension was suffocating. Reformers pleaded with the Pope to satisfy the public's hunger for justice with immediate arrests. But Leo XIV stood firm, explaining that the faithful deserved truth, not just theatrical arrests. He knew that taking action at this moment would only play directly into the hands of the shadow players who had set the trap. Looking down at the sea of news cameras filling St. Peter's Square, the Pope observed that the world was clamoring for a dramatic purge. But he knew that once the dust settled, the exact same hidden forces would still hold all the power. A heavy silence filled the room as the realization set in. The cardinals were merely puppets. To truly grasp this crisis, you and I must understand a complex system hidden from the public eye. The Vatican is not a simple kingdom, it is a massive machine. It is a web of canon law, deep financial channels, lay administrators, and shadow committees operating beneath the surface. While cardinals are temporary, this machine is permanent and self-protecting. When a cardinal falls, another simply takes his place, leaving the underlying corrupt structure entirely untouched. This was the deep-seated rot that Leo XIV had spent years tracking. Even during his early days as a missionary in Peru, he witnessed local bishops being routinely disgraced and replaced, while the same financial networks, elite donors, and protective lawyers remained completely safe. He had filled private notebooks with observations about this systemic flaw. Over a decade ago, he told trusted colleagues that purifying the church required dismantling the hidden offices rather than just replacing the men inside them. Now that he held the papacy, he refused to play his designated part in this endless cycle. On Friday night, the Pope executed the most daring maneuver of his reign. He bypassed the traditional power players, calling a secret meeting that excluded the old guard entirely. Instead, he gathered a select group of 9 individuals, consisting of 5 reformers, 2 financial experts, a canon lawyer, and a former judge. After locking the heavy doors, he threw the dossier onto the table, calling it a strategic weapon rather than a mere list of offenders. He explained that 3 were guilty, 4 cases were blown out of proportion, and 1 target was completely innocent. He paused, noting the mastermind knew this. Then, he asked who would profit most if he arrested all 7. The canon lawyer answered, "The committees." The Pope nodded slowly, confirming their suspicions. An icy silence enveloped the room, as no pontiff in modern history had ever dared to name these shadowy entities out loud. These committees are entirely absent from any official Vatican directory or constitution, yet they hold absolute administrative control. They are small, permanent groups of laymen managing prime real estate, massive investment portfolios, procurement contracts, and diplomatic logistics. The answer to no cardinal, having survived 3 papacies with plans to survive many more. Their loyalty lies strictly with the institution, not the Pope. Unknown to almost everyone, Leo XIV had been quietly mapping this network since his first weeks in office. He conducted this investigation in absolute secrecy, leaving even his closest cardinals entirely in the dark. By April of 2026, the Pope had successfully identified 23 key figures who quietly ran the daily operations of the Holy See. Crucially, several of these exact names were directly linked to the fabrication of the leaked dossier. The Pope was never interested in chasing scapegoat cardinals. He was systematically tracking signatures, financial transactions, and internal transfer memos. He was following the ink trail back to its source. Then, on Saturday morning, he stunned everyone by delivering a public homily that completely ignored the dossier and the accused cardinals. Let us begin with the words that started the fracture. "The Church," he simply said, "will not be reformed by arrests, but by light." He paused, letting the silence build, before adding that light does not run. Inside the Roman Curia, that message landed with the heavy thud of a stone, because every official knew exactly what he meant. Pope Leo XIV was not going to chase individual scandals. Instead, he was going to follow the money and expose the entire machine. For the first time in decades, the machinery of the Church began to feel afraid. By Saturday afternoon, a leak in the Italian press made everything worse, naming a 62-year-old layman who managed contracts worth billions across 4 papacies. The Italian press immediately dubbed this shadowy figure the silent prefect, and within hours, his name became the most searched term in the entire country. Behind the high Vatican walls, this desperate bureaucrat requested an emergency audience with Pope Leo XIV, but the Pope refused to see him, sending a cold 3-line message instead. "You will resign by Monday. You will hand over your records. You will not return." The silent prefect did not write back. He simply walked out of his office that evening and vanished into a small black car waiting outside the St. Anne gate. No one stopped him, and no one followed. By morning, his office was cleared out, but that same night, the magistrate from Milan made a quiet return. Under his arm, the investigator carried a small leather briefcase containing a secret. Inside was a complete copy of the silent prefect's financial records, duplicated 3 months earlier without his knowledge, on the Pope's direct confidential order. Leo XIV had anticipated this very moment long before the leaked dossier ever surfaced, long before the public even knew this bureaucrat existed. He opened the leather case slowly and spent the next 4 hours reading in absolute silence. What he uncovered was far worse than the original rumors. It was a massive network of inflated invoices, phantom suppliers, real estate flips, and names of lawyers and intermediaries operating right inside the holy walls. But the real shock, the revelation that made the Pope stop breathing for a second, was the presence of 3 cardinals on the list. 2 of them had already been named in the original leaks, but the third was a complete surprise. He was an international celebrity, a global moral authority whom no one would ever suspect. Pope Leo slowly set the page down on his wooden desk and whispered a single, chilling sentence. "So that is who built the trap." He looked up at the old magistrate and ordered him to print 3 copies of everything, 1 for the Pope, 1 for the canon lawyer, and 1 to be sealed and sent far away from Rome. The magistrate nodded, asking what should be done about the untouchable cardinal. "He will pay me a visit on Sunday," the Pope replied coldly. "He just does not know it yet." By the time Sunday morning arrived, the Vatican resembled a medieval city under an invisible, high-stakes siege. Crowds of reporters camped at every ancient gate, foreign diplomats demanded updates every hour, and worried pilgrims gathered in the square. Inside the Apostolic Palace, Leo made a decision that would define his entire legacy. He decided he would not arrest the rogue cardinals, nor would he attack the press. Instead, he would dismantle the corrupt structure itself. At 6 a.m., he summoned his trembling secretary, ordering him to bring the canon lawyers, the financial team, and a draft of a new decree. The secretary blinked in confusion and asked what the subject of the decree would be. Leo looked him dead in the eye and said it would dictate who is allowed to manage the wealth of the Church.
The young priest's hands began to shake because he realized the gravity of the plan. The Pope was not looking to punish or reform the financial committees. He was going to dissolve them entirely. That afternoon, the untouchable Cardinal arrived for his summons, smiling and deeply confident. But when he sat down, the Pope did not smile back. He simply slid a single piece of paper across the desk. The Cardinal read the page, his confident grin instantly vanishing into a 10-second panicked silence.
"This is no misunderstanding," the Pope cut him off, "and you will not explain." Standing up slowly, the pontiff laid down the terms. "You will retire from public office by Tuesday. You will hand over every contract for canonical review, and you will never speak on behalf of this church again." When the cardinal asked what would happen if he refused, his voice cracked with sudden fear. Leo did not blink as he replied that everything in the folder would be given to the public on Wednesday. The cardinal stood up, warning the Pope that he was destroying himself. "No," Leo replied, "I am destroying what hides behind you." Within an hour, a handwritten unconditional resignation letter sat on the Pope's desk. For the first time since this nightmare began, the Pope allowed himself a brief, weary smile. But that small moment of relief evaporated quickly, because the silent prefect had not vanished without leaving a trail. By Sunday night, 3 more corrupt cardinals were summoned to the palace one by one. They were not threatened with immediate arrest, but rather given a stark choice. They could resign, hand over their files and disappear, or face total civil and canonical prosecution. 2 of them broke and signed within the hour. The third refused, storming out of the study and yelling that the Pope was a fanatic and a fool who would tear the entire church apart. Leo simply watched him leave, but the defiant cardinal did not realize the trap was already closing. That very night, as we look closely at the evidence, the magistrate from Milan delivered a sealed envelope containing secret Italian banking records tied directly to him. Records the state authorities had not yet analyzed, but soon would. By Monday morning, the panicked prelate was in emergency meetings with his defense lawyers. By that afternoon, he had submitted a complete, unconditional resignation in writing. The legendary old guard had completely collapsed in less than 72 hours. Yet the war was only beginning. Late Monday evening, an influential conservative leader who was on no official suspect list arrived unannounced. This powerful visitor arrived without an appointment and demanded an immediate audience. Pope Leo received him alone in his private chambers, where the cardinal refused to sit down. He warned the Pope that his aggressive purge would fracture the global church, turning bishops against each other, alienating wealthy donors, and pitting entire national bishops' conferences against Rome itself. The Pope listened to the tirade with cold, absolute patience. When the visitor finally paused, Leo spoke softly, asking if any of those bishops, donors, or conferences had actually been working to unite the church before this crisis began. The cardinal opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. "You came here to warn me of a schism," the Pope continued. "But I think you really came to test something else." He stood up slowly, towering over the desk. "You wanted to see if I would flinch." The cardinal remained silent, unable to meet his eyes. Leo walked over to the door and swung it open, telling the prelate that neither he nor the truth would ever flinch. The visitor departed in silence, but that night he made 3 urgent phone calls from his private residence. The Pope's personal secretary logged every single one. By the next morning, those 3 contact numbers were added to the magistrate's active investigation files. The Pope was not just standing firm, he was watching every move. While the public focused on the high-profile resignations, a covert war was raging beneath the surface. The fugitive silent prefect had started calling his remaining allies, threatening to leak highly sensitive documents directly to the media. By Monday evening, a prominent Italian magazine had prepared a scathing story accusing the Pope of orchestrating a brutal purge of his theological rivals. Citing anonymous inside sources, the article compared Leo to the authoritarian dictators of the past century. Within the Vatican, this news hit like an explosive. While reformists panicked, the conservative faction celebrated. But when shown the draft, Leo read it calmly once and set it aside. "This is simply their second weapon," the Pope remarked dryly. When his anxious secretary asked how they should draft a response, Leo looked up and flatly refused to engage, stating they would simply keep moving forward. He walked over to the high window, looking down at the dark square below, which was already filling with early morning pilgrims. "The truth," he murmured, "is not negotiable. And they did not need to win over the media. They needed to fix the power structure." By Tuesday morning, the Pope sat at his desk and signed a 12-page document that would change church history forever. A legally airtight decree drafted in absolute secrecy. This decree transferred all financial oversight of major Vatican operations to a brand new independent authority made of both lay professionals and clergy, reporting solely to the Pope. It instantly dissolved 19 permanent administrative committees, some of which had operated unchecked for over a century. By signing this document, Leo XIV did what his predecessors never dared to do. He went after the roots of the machine, not just its branches. The global press exploded, calling it everything from historic to reckless. But those inside the Vatican walls knew the real story. As you and I look at this turning point, we see it was not a reform. It was a quiet, clinical beheading. By Tuesday afternoon, a desperate silent prefect made his final, desperate move. He contacted a journalist he had frequently used to leak information, offering explosive new documents and tape recordings. But this time, the reporter refused, because the Vatican had already outmaneuvered them. Earlier that morning, the Holy See had released an unprecedented, simple list of 12 names forming the new financial board. It included 3 women, 2 top international regulators, and a retired federal judge from Argentina. It was a brilliant defensive lineup. Anyone wishing to attack this new oversight body would have to publicly attack each of these highly respected figures individually. Behind the high stone walls of the Vatican, the silent prefect finally understood that his time had run out, and so he stopped fighting. By Tuesday night, his formal retirement papers were signed and delivered. By Wednesday morning, guards had placed his private offices under strict canonical seal. By Wednesday afternoon, every trace of his name was quietly erased from official Vatican records. For decades, this man had served 4 different popes, outlasting massive scandals and surviving brutal internal purges. But he could not survive a newly elected pontiff who refused to play their ancient games. Today we are going to uncover how Pope Leo XIV shattered this system, choosing to bypass public spectacle in favor of a quiet, far more dangerous structural revolution. Standing tall at the head of the long wooden table, the new pope looked out at his allies, his voice carrying a chilling, deliberate calm. He told them flatly that this was not a victory. The gathered cardinals waited in absolute silence as he explained that the corrupt men they had just removed were merely symptoms of a deeper rot, and the committees they had dissolved were just tools. He warned them that what they were truly fighting was an entity older than any of them. The Church, he insisted, does not belong to administrative bureaucrats, nor does it belong to wealthy financiers who hide behind holy tradition while betraying its essence. Looking at each cardinal, he declared that the Church belongs to those who pray, those who suffer, and to the gospel itself, concluding with a line that would echo across the globe. This Church will not hide any more. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room, and for a long moment, not a single soul dared to move. Finally, the veteran canon lawyer sitting at the far end of the table leaned forward and whispered, "Holy Father, what comes next?" Leo XIV allowed himself a rare, fleeting smile, replying that they faced more work, much more work. Yet before anyone in that room could even begin to comprehend the sheer scale of the labor ahead, the Pope's personal secretary slipped inside,
handing him a tightly folded note. As the pontiff read the message, his calm expression hardened, and he stood up abruptly, demanding the immediate presence of the magistrate. By Wednesday evening, the international press had completely shifted its tone, realizing that this was no longer a simple scandal about corrupt cardinals, but a historic confrontation with the Pope who refused to perform for the cameras.
This was a Pope who flatly refused to provide the global public with the sensational media circus they so desperately craved, choosing instead to focus on restructuring the institution rather than making dramatic arrests. Naturally, loud media commentators were furious, demanding to know where the trials, the public condemnations, and the true justice were. However, seasoned Vatican insiders understood the deeper game, recognizing that Leo XIV was not avoiding justice, but was actively rejecting a performative version of it that only serves to protect the status quo. He refused to turn guilty administrators into martyrs or throw scapegoats to the press. Instead, he dismantled the very back rooms where secret agreements were made, doing what no modern pontiff had ever dared. He targeted the physical architecture of power. Soon, global financial regulators quietly launched investigations of their own. Remarkably, these external investigations were not aimed at targeting the Vatican, but were being conducted alongside it. For the first time in modern history, secular foreign authorities and the Holy See were actually moving in complete alignment. A high-ranking financial auditor in Brussels admitted to a reporter in confidence that while they had spent 20 years begging the church to clean its house, they never expected a pope to practically hand them the broom. In truth, Leo XIV was not handing them tools. He was simply refusing to keep the heavy doors locked. As he had noted in a homily earlier that week, open doors are the only way for light to enter. A relentless light that does not retreat, does not negotiate, and once inside, can never be extinguished. Yet, as our investigation reveals, this complex story does not end with a clean victory. Deep into the night on Wednesday, a tense knock at the door signaled the arrival of another late-night visitor, the persistent magistrate from Milan. His expression was visibly strained, carrying the weight of exhaustion and deep concern as he clutched a thin folder. He quietly broke the silence, informing the Pope that there was another development. Leo XIV waited, braced for the blow. The magistrate revealed that just hours before submitting his resignation, the silent prefect had secretly transferred a massive fortune. When the Pope asked for the amount, the reply was staggering: 41 million euros. But when asked where the money had gone, the investigator admitted they did not know. The Pope sank into his chair, closing his eyes as the grim reality set in. The war was far from over, and the magistrate quietly added that there was even more to the story. Sliding the folder across the desk, the investigator revealed that the prefect had not acted alone, as 3 other names were uncovered in the transfer documents. Strikingly, none of them belonged to cardinals or the clergy, yet all 3 possessed direct access to the Vatican's sensitive operational systems. Pope Leo opened the folder and studied the names. The first was familiar, the second was a name he had heard in passing, but the third made his heart stop. It was a name he had not seen in 20 years, a shadow from his past in Peru. When the Pope quietly asked if this man was actually in Rome, the magistrate confirmed he had been operating there for 9 years. Closing the folder, the Pope fell silent, realizing they were dealing with an unexpected threat, as this individual had once been a low-level financial advisor back in Lima. Decades earlier, while Robert Francis Prevost was serving in South America, this exact individual had been under intense investigation for massive money laundering involving a Catholic charity. However, that probe was abruptly shut down, and the entire case vanished from official archives. The man had subsequently migrated to Spain, then to Geneva, and eventually settled in Rome. Now, inexplicably, he had secured a position deep within the Vatican's internal operations, the very same infrastructure the Pope believed he had just dismantled. When the Pope asked how many others might be embedded, the magistrate admitted there could be dozens of agents spread across various departments. They were hiding behind complex contracts and protected by untraceable signatures. Hearing this, the Pope slowly closed his eyes, absorbing the depth of the betrayal. Opening his eyes once more, the Pope quietly observed that their work had only just begun.
He ordered the investigator to track down every single infiltrator, emphasizing that this must be done with absolute discretion, demanding solid names rather than sensational newspaper headlines. The magistrate nodded, turning to make his exit, but the Pope stopped him with a final, grave warning to be careful. He noted that the old power structure was now fully aware of their actions, and it possessed vast, immeasurable resources. Walking out into the cold, dark corridor, the magistrate knew exactly what the pontiff meant. The ancient system was wounded, but far from dead, and wounded systems are always the most volatile. Today, as you and I look at the Vatican, the surface appears deceptively calm.
With the international press now distracted by other news, the faithful are celebrating the newly established financial oversight body, while global diplomats quietly adjust to the new reality. Yet, behind the stone walls of the Apostolic Palace, the grueling work goes on, as 41 million euros remain entirely unaccounted for. Meanwhile, the disgraced silent prefect resides in obscurity in a small house outside of Rome. Out of the 7 key cardinals named in the investigative dossier, 3 have been quietly dismissed, while 2 others remain under intense, mounting pressure. The once untouchable cardinal who orchestrated this system is now confined to a remote monastery in northern Italy, completely forgotten by the media, erased from active records, and permanently stripped of his once immense influence. Instead of staging public trials, the Pope did something his enemies never anticipated. He quietly pulled the rug out from under them. The 3 names recently discovered in those secret transaction files confirmed his worst fears, proving that the corrupt architecture he was dismantling extended far deeper than any outside observer could possibly fathom. When a young priest from his secretariat later asked why he had declined to arrest the disgraced cardinals, Leo XIV provided a single, profound answer. He explained that arrests would have merely given his enemies the public spectacle they wanted: names, faces, and immediate replacements, while the underlying network remained completely untouched. Looking directly at the young assistant, he whispered that the Church is never saved by spectacle, but by truth. The Pope added, "The truth is non-negotiable," before rising from his chair and exiting the room. Reflecting on this intense exchange, the young priest later noted in his private diary that the pontiff was not interested in mere punishment, but in dismantling the systemic power structures that enabled the guilt in the first place. Through these bold actions, he became a figure the Vatican had not witnessed in generations, a leader entirely unafraid of the elite who believed they owned the Church. Meanwhile, an incredibly sensitive detail remains hidden from the public eye. On the night the historic reform document was signed, long after his staff had departed and the halls had fallen into absolute darkness, the Pope remained alone at his desk, carefully pulling out a single, blank sheet of paper. On that paper, the Pope drafted a brief, handwritten note, folded it carefully, and slipped it inside a blank envelope before sealing it with hot red wax. The next morning, his personal secretary discovered the unaddressed envelope safely locked inside the top drawer of the desk. He did not dare to open or move it, simply locking the drawer back up, as he had received explicit instructions from the pontiff the previous day. The Pope had made it clear that, if anything unexpected should happen to him, this document must be the very first thing released to the public. When the startled secretary asked what the envelope contained, Leo XIV offered only a single, chilling sentence: "Every name they thought I did not know." To this day, that sealed threat remains locked inside the desk. There it sits, sealed, untouched, and waiting. The remaining conspirators hidden deep within the Vatican's ancient system, those who managed to survive the initial wave of purges, are fully aware of this envelope's existence. While they do not know the precise names written inside, they understand all too well that its contents would utterly ruin them. Consequently, for the first time in modern history, the Church's corrupt machinery is no longer fighting the Pope, but is desperately trying to survive him. Just 48 hours ago, a powerful cardinal who had remained silent for months suddenly requested an urgent private audience, pleading to be allowed to retire quietly without public exposure,
offering to trade his entire network of secret files and contacts in exchange for safety.
A quiet retirement in some forgotten parish in southern Italy was all the desperate cardinal asked for in exchange for his cooperation. Pope Leo XIV received this plea in absolute silence before delivering his uncompromising terms. He would grant the request, but only after the names and the absolute truth were laid bare. The cornered clergyman could only nod. By Saturday morning, 12 critical pages sat on the pontiff's desk, containing 17 newly uncovered names. 3 belonged to powerful figures frequently seen on television, whose covert roles in these shadow operations had never been documented until now. Rather than ordering arrests, Pope Leo did something far more permanent. He shattered the very silence that this ancient structure was built to protect. When the light of truth finally floods a dark room and shatters the silence, no committee, donor, or untitled administrator can ever reconstruct the past. Not even the most expensive lawyers in Geneva or powerful bankers in Liechtenstein can rebuild what once stood. That is precisely why Pope Leo refused to authorize simple arrests, knowing they would only offer a neat ending to a contained scandal. Breaking the silence, however, destroys the entire system from within. If this investigation has moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts below. There is still so much more about Pope Leo XIV that remains hidden, and your support helps us bring these stories to light.